Good evening, everyone. Late Night Mega here, and tonight we're playing Blue-White Tron. Yes, this is the archetype I've been avoiding for quite a while, and I'll start off by explaining why. I've seen multiple people playing Blue Tron at my local game store, and I've never seen them do very good with the deck. And anytime I walked over and saw them in the middle of a game, I always saw them either struggling to control whatever their opponent is doing or struggling to finish the game. And it just looked like they were spinning their wheels a lot and not really getting anywhere. So I was really put off by that. I mean, I hadn't played against Blutron too much, but one time I did was against I was using my black-red aggro control deck, and he was playing Blutron. He's like, "Yeah, this is the best I've done with Blutron in like 2 months." And I'm like, "Really? What's your record right now?" He's like, "It's 1-0-2," and then it became 1-1-2 after our match. And yeah, so I was not attracted to this deck by any means. But then Oath of the Gatewatch came out, and it introduced a couple new cards for Tron players. It introduced Spatial Contortion and Thought Knot Seer, and there were some people on the forums I go to uh, on the Blue Tron thread that were running like 2 Thought Knot Seer, 3 Spatial Contortion. They loved them, and I love the idea of Thought Knot Seer in this deck too, so that's when I decided to start playing it. And I owned everything to Tron. In fact, the only thing I had to buy was the 1 Platinum Angel. That was all I was missing from the deck. And so the way I built this deck is I followed a couple principles. I ended up taking a couple different Blue Tron lists and sort of mashing them together for the ratios between like condescend, remand, repeal, and the talismans, the number of artifacts they had, the fabricates. So I took a couple of lists and I kind of jammed them together and got something that I liked, and kind of how I built my Cruel Ultimatum deck. And I liked the deck. It was a little lackluster, especially the spatial contortion. I found myself losing to creatures that had 4 or more toughness, and wishing that spatial contortion was something else, specifically Path to Exile. And but the Thought Knot Seer was amazing in this deck. I'm going to come back to him, but I go to the forums and I'm like, well, hey, how about have you guys ever considered like splashing white even just for Path to Exile instead of Spatial Contortion? I'm like, I'm over here, I'm losing to these creatures with 4 or more toughness, and I've got Spatial Contortions in my hand just wishing they were paths, and oh my gosh, the backlash I got for suggesting the idea. They're like, no, this is Bluetron. We run it mono blue so that we don't have to worry about taking pain from our mana base. That's one of the big things. What you need to do is add some dismembers to the deck, and I don't understand this train of thought. And I'm like, well, running Dismember instead of Spatial Contortion? No, you run it alongside it. You run 2 Dismembers somewhere else. I'm like, I like the ratio of these other cards in here. I can't find a place to put Dismembers in this and keep the rest of this the way that I like it. And I'm like, all I want is Path to Exile. So they ended up kind of shunning me out of the thread. But I don't understand this train of thought. I understand the idea of keeping a monocolor deck to not take pain from your mana base. But what I don't understand is the moment you say, okay, I need to kill bigger creatures, so I'm going to include Dismember and keep the deck monocolored instead of splashing white for Path to Exile, when your mana base is going to cost you the same or even less than it would be to play a Dismember or 2. I don't get that. Maybe one of you guys can explain it to me in the comments. I don't know. So I looked at the mana base and I'm like, okay, 2 things when I change the mana base. I'm going to keep the number of blue sources, the same amount of blue sources, which I did, and I'm going to have some white sources in the deck. And I'm only splashing white for Path to Exile and Secure the Waste. I told you guys it would be back, so I'm like, well, I'm going to splash white. I might as well run a couple Secure the Waste in here as well. Those are the only white cards in the main deck, so you don't need a ton of white sources. And Talisman of Dominance, that was the card I had. That can easily be swapped out for Talisman of Progress. Now I can fully utilize the Talisman. And I look through the mana base, and I'm like, okay, well, I just take out some of these islands. I put in 2 Hallowed Fountain, 2 Flooded Strand, and 3 of these Seachrome Coast, which is the most amazing colored land in this deck. And you might be saying, well, what about the basic plains? Where did that come from? You know, if you didn't take out a blue source for that. And I didn't. Actually, the basic plains used to be a second Ghost Quarter. So in the transition of the mana base from going mono blue Tron to blue white Tron, I lost 1 Ghost Quarter to do that. And in order to get Path to Exile and Secure the Waste, as well as some cards in the sideboard, but even if it was just those 2 cards, I would say the loss in the second Ghost Quarter is well worth it. And because Path to Exile, it was everything I wanted for a removal spell, and it really patched up that weakness to bigger creatures that I was struggling with. And so I kind of got shunned out of the blue Tron topic. They're like, there's a blue-white Tron deck. So I go over there, and their deck is just about, like 95% of the people are just playing Gifts Ungiven, the Gifts Ungiven combo as their win condition. They're not doing all this other stuff, whereas all this other stuff is a lot more like a blue Tron deck, just barely splashing white for some better removal than Dismember. And so I didn't really get much help from there either. And one of the things I don't like about the gifts is it does make you more reliant on the graveyard. I mean, Mindslaver plus Academy Ruins, that lock is already making you dependent on the graveyard, and so Gifts Ungiven makes you more dependent on the graveyard, so anti-graveyard strategies work better against that. But yeah, when I added Secure the Waste in this deck, a lot of amusing things happened when it came to the finishers. And some of the blue-white Tron lists, you know, they're running like Sphinx's Revelation and Supreme Verdict and stuff. And like, if I wanted to run those cards, I wouldn't be playing Tron. One of the other principles I did when I put my blue Tron list together was I made it so that no card costs double blue in the deck. Only single blue sources, and that's how a lot of people in the blue Tron list build and play their blue Tron. So I brought that same principle forward when I transitioned to blue-white. So I left all those verdicts and revelations outside. And so I had a very different sort of Tron deck than the blue-white Tron, and I was shunned away from the mono blue Tron players, so I was kind of on my own with this, but you know, this deck was just so successful. I want to talk about the Thought-Knot Seers now. Ideally, what you want to do with these guys are amazing in just about every matchup, is your ideal setup is to have all 3 of your Tron lands in play, and then have a colored source by turn 4. So like a Seachrome Coast plus your Tron lands, that's amazing, you're all set. And I like to start out by playing a Thought-Knot Seer, and that leaves you with a colored source and your Urza's Tower, so you can play the Thought-Knot Seer, see what your opponent's doing, see what you got to play around, see what they can't answer, take a card out of their hand, and you have a 4/4 beater or defender. And you also, at the same time, get to keep your mana open to either play a Condescend or a Repeal or a Thirst for Knowledge at the end phase. So it just gives you so many options. It is amazing. And so I highly advocate 2 Thought-Knot Seers in the main deck. There's been times where I wish I had 3, but I just don't know where to put the stuff. because this deck list is so tight, and this deck list has been working so well for so long. I don't want to change anything. I'm very much a if it's working, don't fix it type of person. And so you've got your Wormcoil Engine, your Platinum Angel. We have both versions of Kozilek, which seems kind of weird. Here's the story behind that. When I first started playing with Blue Tron, I did not own any Kozilek the Great Distortion yet. Hadn't opened it from a pack. Ended up trading a Nissa, which I did open for this. And I was glad I did that. They were both around the same value at the time. And so I was running Kozilek Butcher of Truth in the meantime. And I also had a, instead of this, there was an Eye of Ugin in this main deck, so I was running 25 land. And that also enabled turn 3 Thought-Knot Seer. You can still do a turn 3 Thought-Knot Seer with Talisman of Progress, too, if that ever arises. So that option's there. So I was running the Butcher of Truth, and I liked the Annihilator 4, and I liked the Graveyard Shuffling. I remember I had one game where my opponent got a Sorin emblem out, and so I had to sacrifice a creature every turn. So I'm like, okay, I'll sacrifice, I'll play Ulamog, exile 2 of your things, then I have to sacrifice my Ulamog so it can't attack come my next turn. But then I'll play Kozilek, draw 4 cards, end up sacrificing the Kozilek, shuffle my whole graveyard back into my deck, use Eye of Ugin, tutor up Ulamog, play it again, tutor up Kozilek. Yeah, it was silly. So I did like the graveyard sort of restocking of my deck. I did like that aspect. I did like the Annihilator aspect as well. I'm not running an Emrakul. I feel like this deck doesn't really need Emrakul, and Emrakul's 15 mana. Which even for Tron, it is a lot. I mean, once you reach Tron, you want stuff to be doing with your Tron mana as it is, and once I reach 15 mana, you know, Ulamog and Kozilek and Secure the Way, something else has probably already won me the game. And if I want a huge mana sink, you know, the Mindslaver lock is 10 mana plus 2 to activate the Academy Runes plus tapping the Academy Runes itself, so it's technically about 13 mana. And so that's kind of the super high-end finisher. And you've got Ugin in here as well, because I really like Ugin. That's another thing I really like about this deck, is I get the opportunity to play 4 of my favorite cards that have been released in Standard over the past couple of years. I get to play Ugin the Spirit Dragon from Fate Reforged. From Dragons of Tarkir, my favorite card is Secure the Waste, get to play that. From Battle for Zendikar, Ulamog, and from Oath of the Gatewatch, Kozilek. And so some people were kind of debating on if these Eldrazi's were really worth it, even after the Eye of Ugin was banned. Once Eye of Ugin got banned, you know, I had both Kozileks at the time, and I just swapped Butcher of Truth with the Great Distortion here, and I always wished to get Butcher of Truth back into the deck, but I didn't know where to put it. Well, Eye of Ugin got banned, and I'm just like, well, I'll just put Butcher of Truth in place of Eye of Ugin and see how that does, and lo and behold, everything turned out fine. You know, Eye of Ugin, you know, it helps you. I do wish there were times where I could use Expedition Map or use Fabricate to get Expedition Map to get Eye of Ugin to start getting my Eldrazi. I do miss that. But being able to just flat out draw 4 cards and have this Annihilator and this Graveyard replenish, you know, that'll get you enough. Drawing 4 cards should get you something to do with your Tron mana. If not, you should be getting some Thirst for Knowledge, which should get you something to do with your Tron mana. I really like this this setup, if I haven't mentioned that yet. So, Secure the Waste. What its function is in this deck is you can play it early, get a couple chump blockers, maybe trade with some small creatures or whatever, or you can play it late for a really ridiculous effect. I've played this thing for like 15, for X equals 15 before, and it is silly. And it also makes people do some really weird stuff. Like I've seen people sideboarding against this deck and doing some really weird things, and they try to answer like all of my finishers, and I have not seen that strategy work ever. remember one time, like, someone brought in, we started turns, he's like, turn 0, I have Leyline of Sanctity. And I just look at him kind of weird. I'm like, okay. And I'm not sure why you have it. It's like, oh, it's so you can't target me with Mindslaver. Like, okay, so you sideboarded a card specifically for Mindslaver. I think I took my Thought-Knot Seers out, but it also stops those as well. But yeah, because he was a removal-heavy control deck, I'm not going to want Thought-Knot Seer against that necessarily. And so I'm like, okay, and then he also plays like Rest in Peace, and I'm like, Rest in Peace, what does that even do against me? I'm not running the gifts. He might have thought I was running gifts, I don't know. And I have had people bring in Mass Graveyard Hate because they see Blue-White Tron and assume it's gifts, even if they don't see it game one, so that's interesting to me as well. And he's like, well, it does stop you from getting your Mindslaver back with Academy Runes. I'm just like, okay. And then he has like, is it Static Caster to deal with? Yeah, I've had people side in is it Static Caster, things that only deal with tokens because you saw the Secure the Waste, and I just chuckle at that stuff. And then I'm like, okay, so you have all of that stuff. Here's an Ulamog, try and deal with that. And then so they have all these sideboard cards that only deal with certain finishers but not others, and they end up losing to like an Ugin or an Ulamog, or we'll go to my sideboard here and Sundering Titan, and it's just silly. I've never seen someone succeed at trying to answer the finishers. The way you win against this deck is beat it before I start dropping all of these nasty things on you, and getting control of the game. So another thing I really like about this deck is all the stuff you can do when you reach 2 mana. You know, you've got the Expedition map, turn 1 you can crack it, turn 2 at the end of your opponent's turn, and if you don't have an opportunity to crack it, that's okay, because you might need to counter something. You have 7 counters that come online at 2 mana, Remand and Condescend, and both of them they'll either scry or draw you an extra card, so you're digging deeper through your deck, you're filtering through your deck, repeal, bounce something, draw a card. And so there's a lot of stuff that's just getting you through your deck, getting you Tron assembled, and for Thirst for Knowledge as well. A lot of times you'll discard, like 90% of the time I'm discarding a Talisman to a Thirst for Knowledge. And sometimes it's okay to discard 2 other cards to it. Sometimes I'll discard a Mindslaver early on, and if I want it back later, I can just Academy Runes. If not, that's okay. I have plenty of other ways to win the game here. And so tons of variety, tons of consistency. That's one thing I really like about this deck, is it is very consistent. It is very resilient as well, with all this card draw, all of these control elements, and all of these finishers, and such a variety of finishers. It makes for a great combination for a deck. Now let's take a look at the sideboard. So the sideboard, I have some alternate finishers in here. We've got Sundering Titan. I like to bring this in against basically any deck running 3 colors or more. And it just wrecks their mana base, especially when you combine it with an Ulamog. And I've had a time against an Abzan Collected Company deck where I play the Sundering Titan, kill 3 of their lands. They have to path the Sundering Titan because it's a huge threat to them. So I kill 3 more of their lands, and then I drop an Ulamog and exile their 2 man lands that Sundering Titan couldn't hit, and now they're completely out of lands and they're staring down an Ulamog. So I'm using things like that. Pithing Needle, something you can search for. 4th Path to Exile. A lot of people have asked me, well, why isn't it in the main board? And really it probably should be. The issue is I don't know where to put it. I like having 7 counter spells in the main. I like having 2 repeals in the main. I cite it in a lot of matchups, but what is getting cited out differs depending on what I'm playing against. Sometimes I'm siding out counterspells, sometimes I'm siding out repeal, sometimes I'm siding out fabricate, sometimes I might side out one of the thirsts. Yeah, so it's different depending on what deck you're playing against, and that's why it's kind of in the sideboard. And I mean, I've kind of always run it that way, and like I said, I just have loved this ratio so much for the number of artifacts in the main deck, the number of counters in the main deck, number of repeals, the fabricates, the thirst. I like this as the main deck setup, the main deck ratios in this, and I just really didn't want to mess with that. And in the end, I was running, when I had the blue Tron, it was 3 spatial contortions in the main deck and 1 in the side. I'm like, well, I'm just going to carry that forward with the blue-white, because literally all I did was swap spatial contortions with Path to Exiles. I think it took out a repeal and something else to put in the 2 secure the waste. I might have had a second Mindslaver as something to discard to Thirst for Knowledge. Speaking of Mindslaver, don't ever be afraid to just use this as a one-shot effect. There's so many times where I just use this as a one-shot effect even though I don't have the lock. I've had people that play Blue Tron at my store tell me, oh, just save your Mindslaver until you have all the mana you need and the Academy runes and you have the lock. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use the Mindslaver, use it to like wreck your opponent for 1 turn, make them make a bunch of bad plays. And I've done some silly stuff too, like against a green Tron deck, having them use Sylvan Scrying instead of tutoring for a Tron land, get a Ghost Quarter, have them use the Ghost Quarter and blow up their own Tron land, and then fail to find a basic land. And yeah, it does a lot of silly things. Against control decks, I've made people cast a spell and then counter it with their own cryptic command or something. It's silly. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with Mindslaver, and sometimes all it does is really buy you a turn, but really that might be all you need in order to get like an Ulamog and fix everything. Kozilek is another great thing. I don't think I've lost too many games where Kozilek has resolved. He just refills my hand and turns things into counter spells. People like to use Path to Exile on this guy, and I like to respond by discarding Expedition Map to counter it, or discarding Path to Exile to counter a Path to Exile. That's amusing too. Or discarding Repeal to counter it, or Condescend. It's really funny. At least I find it funny. My opponents might not find it as funny. Anyways, back to the sideboard. We've got 2 Relic of Progenitus. I like the Mass Graveyard Exile. But here's where we get a little bit different from the past control decks. You know, in the past I've had a sacrifice effect in the sideboard, and you notice you don't see one here. But I do have this Aetherize, and I have really enjoyed this. Once again, it only costs 1 blue. Blessed Alliance wasn't a thing yet when I was playing this, so that wasn't an option. It was Celestial Flare, and I'm avoiding double white. But Aetherize works pretty well as well. It just nullifies an entire combat step, and sometimes it does a little bit more than that, like against Boggles or Infect. It does not target their stuff, and it returns all the attacking creatures, so it does not matter if it has hexproof, doesn't matter if you have it souped up with all these enchantments on it, it's going back to your hand and you're losing all your enchantments. And so Aetherize has been pretty good. I like a second Ugin in the side. I did have a Void Winnower here for a while. When Eye of Ugin was still legal, Void Winnower was a little bit better because you could search for it, and it was cute against some decks. It was really amusing against a Storm deck because suddenly they can't cast half their deck and they're trying to play the Storm combo. And so that was amusing, but ultimately I think I'd rather just have the second Ugin in here. There's a lot of decks that just can't beat an Ugin. Leyline of Sanctity, the only card in the entire 75 that has a double mana cost in it, and it and you can play it for free potentially. So this is good against the combo decks. It's good against Jund, things that are playing hand disruption. It's good against burn. And so those are the matchups where this will come in. And I've really liked having it. And even if I don't get it in my opener, it's still not terribly difficult to get the double white. You know, you've got the talismans, you've got Seachrome Coast, you've got the Flooded Strands. Seachrome Coast is great, so I always love to play one of these within the first couple turns. You know, getting Tron on turn by turn 4 is kind of the main goal, and this deck does it pretty darn consistently, more so than what I thought it would going into a blue Tron, because I've seen blue Tron players sit there and like not even assemble Tron for the whole time, and I don't really know what their problem is, but between expedition maps, a full play set of Tron, and all this other draw and filter we've got, I have not had that many problems. Sometimes I do, sometimes I sit there for a while, but then and that's okay too, because I've got plenty of control spells to slow the game down while I draw these cards. That's one thing I like about this deck, you know. Green Red Tron, they're playing all these chromatic spheres and stars to draw cards. I've got a whole bunch of stuff that draws and filters, but they also double as control spells. They're countering, they're bouncing stuff, all of this. So I really like this deck. This is a very solid deck, and I know there's a ton more sideboard options you could put in here, and I've considered some of them, but once again, you know, this sideboard has been working for me for so long that I don't feel like changing it. So, but yeah, go ahead, experiment, have fun. Negates, those are good against control. I like to bring in Spellburst against control as well. Another thing about Spellburst is don't be afraid to just play it early if you need to. If you need something countered and you can't buy it back, don't worry about it. You have plenty of other finishers that will help you win this game. Whether it's Kozilek or Ulamog, or it's Wormcoil Engine, or it's Mindslaver, or it's Ugin, or it's Sundering Titan, you know, let the other finishers pick up the slack if one of them fails. And so yeah, this is my blue-white Tron. This is what I call one of the third member of the trifecta of my best modern decks. And I don't remember the last time I took this to an FNM and lost more than one match with it. It was probably still in the mono blue Tron stage. But since I made it blue-white, like, I've not lost more than one match. My records are like 3-1 or 4-1 or going undefeated. And like I said, just super consistent, super resilient, and a huge variety in the number of finishers, especially Secure the Wastes. And I still love how people try to answer this deck by answering the finishers and bring in Secure the Wastes and that. There are a lot of Tron hate cards out there, like you know, Blood Moon is obviously a problem. You're going to want to counter that. But even if you don't manage to counter it, you know, your talismans can still make blue or white. They can still make your colors. And they can still make your colorless too, which is important for Thought-Knots here. And your expedition map can search you basics. So there's that option as well. And then sometimes, and this is also true of Stony Silence, sometimes you just need to repeal it. Just get it off the field for one turn, and just get that one turn of Tron mana in order to drop something big like a Kozilek or an Ugin, and then who cares if they have Blood Moon, because you're just going to bash them with your big Eldrazi. And so that's another strategy, or sometimes you just repeal a Stony Silence so you can crack your expedition map and get your final Tron piece, and now you don't care if Stony Silence is out there anymore, because you have an Ugin. So yeah, I really like this deck. Get to play with a lot of my favorite cards, and get to play a very control-style Tron deck. So, and it's very different from most other Tron decks you're going to see. So yeah, highly recommend it. A lot of fun, a lot of consistency, a lot of resiliency. I call it one of my best decks for a reason. And so now, time to give you guys a little teaser for the next deck that I'm going to show. I probably played this deck for like 3 to 4 months straight, and taking it to a state championship as well and getting 6th place there. And after that, I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to put this deck down, not because it was losing or doing bad, but because I'm ready to try a different idea finally. And so this next deck you're going to see, it is one of the craziest decks you're going to see on this channel, or maybe anywhere. And yeah, it's very off the wall. It's very much a do whatever you want sort of deck. And one more thing I'll tell you about it is it does involve a card in a previous video that I said would be coming back again. So that is your hint until next time. So until then, this is Late Night Mega. Good night, everyone.